What is up, everybody? Well, this past weekend, we got the release of the most highly anticipated for many horror film of the year, Longlegs. And one of the things that stood out about Longlegs to me on my one watch was how gripping, how chilling, how genuinely unnerving the opening scene was. And it got me thinking, how cool would that be? How much fun would that be to do a video talking about my favorite opening scenes in horror? So that's what we're going to do today. It started off as a top 10. But there were so many that I just had a hard time trying to pick what was going to make the cut. And I had 4 to 5 honorable mentions lingering that we're just going to go on and do a top 15. So these are my personal top 15 greatest horror opening scenes. And there's a lot of things that makes a great horror opening scene, a iconic opening sequence. For many, it's how scary it is. For many, it's how it establishes the tone and the approach of the movie. Sometimes it's the introduction of the villain, or the first time we get to see them, or there's many different things that make a opening scene to a horror film such an iconic part of the movie. So all 15 that I'm talking about here are iconic and awesome and among my favorites for very different reasons, and I'll get into all of that. Be sure to let me know your guys' favorites down in the comment section below. Starting off at number 15 for me is going to be the remake to Maniac, starring Elijah Wood. Now, the original Maniac is a very disturbing movie too, which also has a really good opening scene, but what I loved about the opening scene to the remake, and they actually let this scene out on social media to kind of gain buzz and gain some hype and some traction for this movie before it came out, and my God, it worked. So the thing that's different about the Elijah Wood remake is that it's all told from a first-person POV. And that's what this opening scene really establishes. It's not only that is the big difference, but how effective that is going to be to make such a different movie based off the same type of themes, the same type of horror as the original Maniac. And so you have Elijah Wood's character. It's establishing this nighttime kind of seedy look to it, where he's stalking the streets at night and trying to find his victims. And there's a lot of heavy breathing in the microphone as it's establishing this, all while he's stalking this girl. And the way that it culminates just like grabs you by the throat and says, this is the movie you're about to experience for the next 90 minutes, where he finally gets behind her, whispers to her, she turns around, freaks out, and you just see the first kill in all of its gory glory.
Please don't scream. You're so beautiful.
Where he just sticks a knife through her throat, scalps her all in one shot. It's fucking wicked. It's a movie that I still have yet to review. I need to rectify that because I have reviewed the original. But yeah, that is a great opening scene that had to make my list. Coming in at number 4 is going to be the opening to It Follows. And this is a movie that, an opening scene that totally establishes the concept and the sense of dread and the whole effective nature of not really seeing the force that is coming after these people, not really seeing the killer, not really seeing what the evil is going to be. And so you just have this girl that is panicked, that is running around all in one shot in this neighborhood like she's running from something, but we just don't see it. We're like, what is she running from? You just see the fear in her eyes, you hear the fear in her voice. And it all culminates on her sitting on the beach and making a phone call, I believe, to her father. I haven't seen it in a few years. And then it just immediately cuts to her dead body with her leg bent 90 degrees the wrong way. And it's just a really chilling shot. And if you have no idea what the premise of It Follows is, that opening scene is still going to grip you for this movie and go, what the fuck was chasing her? What is that? I must find out. That's the job of an opening scene, and It Follows kills it. Now, really quick before we carry on to the top, while opening scenes are integral to establish the tone and approach of a movie, if you need help establishing good habits, good eating, or your meal prep process, check out the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Summers are always a busy and chaotic time, with the kids being home all day and vacation planning and pool parties. So with the warm sunny days calling your name, be sure to fuel up using Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery service takes the stress out of meal prepping and sets you up for success to maintain your nutritional and dietary goals during the summer. Skip the grocery store, the prep, and best of all, the cleanup, and enjoy chef-curated, dietitian-approved meals that are delivered directly to your door. And continue to strive towards your summer wellness goals with options like Keto, Calorie Smart, and Protein Plus. And with over 34 chef-created meals, there's a variety of weekly options that will never allow you to fall victim to food fatigue. Plus, you can round out your meal and replenish your snack supply with over 55 different add-ons such as apple cinnamon pancakes or fruit smoothies. So head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code CodyLeach50 to get 50% off of your first Factor box and 20% off of your next month of orders. That's code CodyLeach50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off of your next month of orders. And thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Coming at number 13 for me is going to be the opening to the original Hitcher, and it is finally getting a physical release, a 4K Blu-ray. Thank God. If you're one of the people like me that have been waiting for years and years and years to get a physical copy of one of your favorite movies, The Hitcher, the time is now, brought to you by Second Sight. So please go over, pre-order that fucking thing, and add it to your collection because the time is now. This video is not sponsored by Second Sight. So anyway, the opening to this movie, it's the same opening as the remake, but the remake's average. It's okay, it's fine, but there's no reason to talk about that. We're talking about the original here. And what I love about this is that it just totally gives you everything that you need to know, which is almost nothing about the lead killer in John Ryder. And you have a pickup immediately. The movie doesn't even give you a second to ease into it. Just immediately, as soon as it opens, you got C. Thomas Howell driving in a rainstorm, sees this dark figure looking for a ride, stops, picks him up. I mean, the first line of dialogue in the movie just sets the tone where he goes, "My mom always told me never to do this." Well,
Mom was right.
But he picks up John Ryder, and that whole initial sequence where they're just having a dialogue exchange and it slowly just turns sinister is one of my favorite scenes of that movie, one of my favorite scenes in horror history. But having a innocuous enough conversation, just chatting away, whatever. And it all kind of comes to its crescendo whenever there is this VW Beetle that is broke down on the side of the road, and Jim Halsey tries to pull off and help him, and John Ryder pushes the wheel and goes back into the road, and they start to talk about what is happening with that car. And John Ryder says that basically he knows what's happening, and the guy that was driving the car couldn't have gone very far. How do you know that? Because I cut off his legs. And you're just like, what the fuck? What's going on? Get him the fuck out of your car. And so, I mean, just that whole opening scene, just for a dialogue exchange to establish a villain, to establish the battle of wills that is about to happen across this movie, and to establish the tone that we are going for in The Hitcher, it's masterful in my mind. I love it. Coming in at number 12 is a fairly recent addition to this list, and that is A Quiet Place, the original film. And I just rewatched this a couple of nights ago, and what is so brilliant about the opening few minutes of this movie is so many things about establishing the rules, establishing how these monsters work, establishing how this family has to survive, but also just gripping you by the throat and starting this entire story with just extreme devastation. So it opens with this family, the Abbott family, basically rummaging through this drugstore, this convenience store, trying to find drugs or medicine and some other things. And in the few absolutely silent scenes that you get in this store, it establishes so much. It establishes that they have to be quiet. It establishes the different things that they do to try to maintain a very low sound, like walking barefoot and stepping in sand. You have the parents refusing to let the kid have the toy, and when he holds it, they all pause, almost like he's holding a severed head. And it just tells you so much. A lot of us knew what the gimmick of this movie was going to be when we walked into it, but an opening scene really needs to establish a lot, as if the viewer is watching this with no knowledge whatsoever. And you get everything that you need in this opening sequence. Even a shot where they're leaving the store, and you just have a newspaper flapping in the wind, and it says, "It's sound," and all these details that you need to understand the rules of this universe. But then you have the death of little Bo Abbott. And it establishes so much about the story that we're about to have within these characters, and the grief that they're going to be starting off with, and the devastation, and then the drama between the oldest daughter and John Krasinski's character, the father, where she perceives that he blames her and she blames herself, and she's very rebellious, and almost to a point almost seems like she wants to die with how much she just doesn't want to listen to the rules because she's so guilt-stricken for giving this toy to her little brother, not realizing that he was going to put batteries back into it, as well as how much that drives the lead character of Lee Abbott as he is basically hell-bent on protecting his family and making sure that nothing else happens to any other member of his family, whether it costs him his life or not. It just establishes everything from the story to the rules to the character motivation. So it's a great opening to this movie, a great opening to this universe, and it absolutely had to make my list here at number 12. Now, most of these movies, if not damn near the entire list, is a collection of what a lot of people would consider some of the best horror films of all time. Number 11 is a bit of an exception to that rule. While I have always had some nostalgia and some enjoyment for this movie, it is not a movie that most people would call a good film, but it has one of the most awesome opening scenes of a horror film. So coming in at number 11 is going to be Ghost Ship. This came out like in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there, where, right in that 2000s horror, we got 13 Ghosts and House of Wax and things like that. This fits right in there. And the story of this movie, as per the title, is about this haunted ocean liner, this haunted cruise ship where there has been basically a huge tragedy in the beginning, which we're going to talk about for sure. And these treasure hunters, decades later, find this ship, and they're basically trying to investigate it and figure out if this is the ship and figure out how to get this ship back so they can get their reward for finding it. And it's still haunted, so they start to die one by one. But the opening scene of this movie is just one of the most wicked introductions to a horror flick, especially in the 2000s, where you have it takes place like in the 40s or the 50s or some shit like that, and you have a whole deck full of people that are partying and having a good time and dancing, and everything's all whimsical, and it just starts to show these shots of this wire barrier that is around the deck starting to tighten and starting to shake, and you just look and you're like, oh, what the fuck is about to happen now? And it's getting so wound up with tension that eventually it snaps and it just whizzes through and cuts the entire crew, all of the guests, all of the waiters, everybody in half. And so you just have a whole crew of people that are like, what the fuck? And then like heads fall off and arms fall off and torsos fall off, and it is just wicked. I still enjoy the movie. It definitely has its flaws. It is not a classic by any means, but even for those that think that it is a bad movie or a terrible movie, it's still an opening scene that is awesome, that people remember that movie for. It's just a shame that the movie peaks there, and the rest of the movie has a very large uphill battle trying to keep up with that opening sequence. Coming in at number 10, I kind of cheated a bit, and I have two movies here, and it's because I really could not decide between them which opening is better. One of them is more so for the opening scene itself, and the other one is more so for the title sequence. So Evil Dead and Evil Dead Rise. And these two openings, I think, just they really grip you by the throat for these new era of Evil Dead films. You have the Fede Alvarez one where you have these people that are strapping this young girl up and they're about ready to burn her alive. And it's just such an intense sequence because she's screaming and she's wailing and she's begging for her life. And you see the tears and the father, who is the one who's about to do this to her. And you're like, what is going on? And then just the tonal shift that happens in her voice.
I will rip your soul out, Daddy.
I'll rip your soul out, you pathetic fuck!
Whenever she's crying, and then she says something that lets everybody know, oh shit, this is a demon, this is a deadite, and then suddenly, whoosh, that comes out. And it goes from a scene that is very haunting and very intense and very disturbing because of what's about to happen, suddenly to a scene that is very terrifying because you see what the deadites are going to be like in this new iteration of Evil Dead and what ride we are in for. And so it's an opening scene that just grabs you and says, this is Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, motherfuckers, strap in. Now, Evil Dead Rise, I still think has a really good opening scene for very similar reasons, where you have these three friends that are off at this lake. One of them seemingly is sick, and then chaos and some gore ensues. But what really stands out about this opening scene is not only for all of the deadite action and all the gore and all the intensity that kicks off the tone of what this movie is going to be, which is a similar approach to Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, but that title sequence. That title sequence is probably the greatest title sequence of the last 10 years. I mean, I can't think of a better example, where you have everything established. You have the chick that is possessed by the deadite in the water, and then slowly she just starts to ascend from the water. And as she ascends, so does the titles behind the trees, and it says Evil Dead Rise. look, I have my issues with Evil Dead Rise. I think it's a very good movie, but this is one of those times where it feels like the movie almost peaks at the opening sequence because of how fucking cool it is. And so when I was in the theater, not really skeptical, but, you know, having modest expectations for Evil Dead Rise, when that title sequence came up, I was like, ho, 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 ho. Hurt me, baby. I'm ready. Coming in at number 9 is going to be the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And I did go back and forth in my head between this and Dream Warriors, because I do think Dream Warriors also has a very good opening scene at kind of reestablishing the return of the more akin to the first film approach of Freddy Krueger after what we got in the second film. And so I ended up landing on the original because there's so much that you get in the sequence of the original. You have, of course, the opening scene, which is the creation, the crafting of the glove, which in and of itself is wicked because you're like, what the fuck is this thing? Like, we had never seen anything like that back in 1984 when you crafting this little razor glove. Like, what is that for? And then it immediately cuts to Tina in a boiler room. And, she's in her nightgown, she's running around. Just the atmosphere and the look of a boiler room is so sinister and grimy and gross and wet and slimy. And just, there's nothing appealing about that. And so her running around in that setting is creepy. You get the little screeches, you get the shadows of Freddy, you get little bits of his voice, Tina, like the things that he's saying. And it all culminates in her backing up basically in a dead end. And then Freddy comes up behind her and he's all cast in shadow. And then it just cuts to her waking up. And again, an opening sequence that you get every piece of information that you need for the fucked up ride you're about to go on just in that opening 2 or 3 minutes. You have the weapon, you have the setting, you have a hint of what the villain is about to be. And then you have the establishment of, oh, this is all inside of a dream. So, I went back and forth again, like with those two movies, because I think they establish similar things, but you have to give it to that original for one of those movies. I wish I could go back and just watch it in a theater with the first people that get to see it and what that tells people back in the day when I've never seen anything like that before. Like, what are we in for? What is this about to be? Coming in at number 8 is going to be Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which is my favorite zombie film of all time, most days when you ask me. And what I love about this opening scene is that, again, it's one of those things that just totally establishes what this new approach is going to be. Very similar to Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead. The original Romero films were movies that had a very specific approach, specific tone. You had the slow-moving zombies that were more about, the numbers and the horde quality of it versus, individual ferocity of them. And me personally, I don't really get a whole lot of fear or a whole lot of intimidation out of that style of zombies. I much prefer the Dawn of the Dead, the Zack Snyder or the 28 Days Later style zombies. That's just my own personal opinion. But what this opening does is that it just totally gives you a screenshot or a snapshot in time of this woman's life. She's at work. You start to get these little hints that something's going wrong where they're wheeling somebody into the hospital just as she's getting off her shift. And she goes home. Everything seems normal with her husband. Everything's cool. They fuck in the shower. They wake up in the morning. And despite the fact that in this opening scene, I've always found it weird that this neighbor girl walks into their bedroom in the morning without being invited into their house for one, but into their bedroom for another. And they're not like weirded out by that. They're just like, oh, hey, what's up, honey? What's going on? God. That's so weird to me. But anyway, that aside, you have that girl who walks in, and when she walks into the light and part of her face is missing, and they're like, oh, fuck. And then suddenly it's bite. And then it shows how ferocious the zombies are, how quick they're going to turn. Then husband turns on wife, and it shows just how rage-fueled and how strong and how relentless these zombies are going to be. And then her coming outside and seeing like literally the world on fire outside of her house. And it's just such an incredible introduction to this movie. It's such a tonal shift from what you expect when you know and love the original Dawn of the Dead. And it just gives you the impression that this is going to be a completely different animal, which every remake should be, especially to a classic. But beyond that, I have a really nostalgic love for this opening because I don't know how many people remember this, But before this movie came out in theaters, I don't remember if it was like USA Network or something like that. There was a TV station that had advertised for a couple of days, like, after this program, and I don't even remember what the fuck the show was. You watch this show, and after this program, you're going to get the first 6 minutes preview of the new Dawn of the Dead film. And they played it uncut from my memory. Like, they played it absolutely how it is in the theaters, from the opening to the point where she crashes her car just before you get the title sequence and the Johnny Cash music and everything. They showed that entire thing on national television to entice you to go and see the rest of the movie. And I thought that at the time and today, and I don't remember how many movies have even done anything like that besides this Dawn of the Dead. What a brilliant marketing tool to show what is such an awesome and exciting and gripping opening sequence, and then cut it off. And now you've enticed everybody that sat through that, pretty much everybody. Now they have to go see the movie because fuck, what happens next? Like, that was so brilliant to me. So I don't remember. Let me know in the comment section if you were there, if you saw this, if you were a part of that, because it's just such a cool little detail about this that I never really hear anybody talk about. Because I remember being 14 years old and seeing that opening and being like, when the fuck is this movie coming out? Because we are there. Coming at number 7 is going to be It. And honestly, it doesn't matter whether you talk about the 1990 miniseries or the It Chapter 1 film, the Andy Muschietti movie. To me, they're both equally great, equally effective. It just really depends on which one hits you the hardest. Like, for me, the opening scene of the 1991 is what I cherish and what I remember because I was a kid seeing that, and that terrified me. And it was one of the only times I can count on one hand how many times I was genuinely scared watching horror films as a kid. That was one of them. It's dated now, of course, and it's not perfect. There's elements to it where, of course, they cut to just his mouth and you don't really get to see the arm come off. You just kind of suggest it, and then you find out later on what happened. But that's what I grew up with. And then you have this newer scene in It Chapter 1 that is certainly a lot more gore-filled. It certainly goes full bore. Like, it shows the arm it being off. It shows it shows Georgie crawling around in the rain on the street with his arm torn off. It shows the hands pulling him down back. So it's a more intense sequence for those reasons. The only reason it gets held back from me is because I hate the look of Pennywise's face when it goes CG and he bites the arm. To me, that's the one moment where the scene loses me. And if it had been more practical, I would easily give the nod to the new one. But regardless, the whole sequence of the first introduction of Pennywise and showing Georgie and just the dialogue exchange between them as you see this innocent child be seduced and drawn in and have his trust compromised by this monster. It's terrifying stuff. And before anybody corrects me, because I know somebody will, of course, technically this is only the opening scene of the new film. Like, there's a couple of things that happen before we get to this scene in the 1990 miniseries. The opening scene of the miniseries is that little girl where she just sees the Pennywise through all of the sheets in the wind, which is still a great opening sequence. But regardless, if we're going to talk about that scene specifically, I prefer the 1990 version just because of my experience with it as a kid. But regardless, if the new one is the only one that existed, it belongs on this list because it's fucking crazy. It's terrifying, and it sets up the whole movie in a way where you're just like, oh God, this is gonna be nightmare fuel, isn't it? Isn't it? Coming at number 6 for me is going to be the original Jeepers Creepers. And what's interesting about this opening scene is that it doesn't necessarily prepare you for what you're in store for. Like, it really doesn't tell you anything about what the rest of the movie really is about and what is about to be the ride it's going to take you on. All it really does is just establish this feeling of tension and establish this fear factor and put you on the edge of your seat right away. You have the two main characters of Derry and Trish. They're just driving along the road. Amazing chemistry between those two actors, by the way, on being a brother and sister. Like, they absolutely just nail that. The antagonism towards each other, it's perfection. And so that whole thing just establishes them as really fun characters that you invest yourself in. But the way this opening sequence is shot, where it's, they're driving along, and then slowly in the background, you just start to see this dot. And it slowly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as it comes up behind him, and it's that fucking truck.
Turns out you're a twin. Jesus.
and then wah, and the sound of the horn, and then how quickly the scene changes from comedy and sibling antagonism to now intensity, fight or flight, and they're trying to get around him and he won't move and he's honking, and you hear the engine, like the souped up engine of this truck, and goes around him and gets back behind I mean, it's a crazy ass scene that it hooks you, it gets you tense, it gets you like, ooh, your adrenaline's pumping, but it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you that there's a fucking monster in that truck. It doesn't tell you that it eats body parts and it regenerates them. It doesn't tell you that there's basically a serial killer inside of that. All you know is, what the fuck was that truck, and what is going on here? And I had the privilege of watching this movie for the first time, not knowing anything about it. I didn't watch a trailer. I didn't know a plot synopsis. I just saw the title and I saw the cover and I rented it. And that's the way we used to rent horror movies back in the day. That's a cool fucking cover. I'm checking it out. It's like a metal album. You're like, yep, getting that one. And so that's what I love about this opening sequence, is that it is so effective at getting your adrenaline pumping while telling you jack shit about what Jeepers Creepers is about. Coming in at number 5 brings us back to zombies, and I've got 28 Weeks Later this high on the list. And I remember how insane this opening sequence was when I saw this in theaters. And actually, at the time, I hadn't even seen 28 Days Later yet. When I first moved to Georgia, I was used to living in Ohio, where like movie theaters and stores and everything was pretty close to you. And then we moved out to the country when I was 14. I couldn't drive yet. My parents were working all the time. And it just felt like everything was so far away. There was nothing to fucking do. And so a couple of times during the summer, I would go with my parents to, they'd go to work all day. I would drive with them. And then at a certain point in the day, after, the afternoon started to come around, I would walk across the street to where the movie theater was inside the city of Savannah. And I would basically spend the day there. I'd pick 2 or 3 movies and I would just go back and forth and watch movies. And so this day in particular, if I'm not mistaken, it was Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and 28 Weeks Later was the 2 movies that I was watching. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So very weird double feature. but yeah, so I watched, I think I watched Silver Surfer first. Okay, at best movie. Okay, whatever. And then the second movie, I was like, well, I haven't seen 28 Days Later, but fuck it. Like, I need to watch something more intense than what that was. So I walked into 28 Weeks Later blind. And holy shit, man. Like, I was in a theater with like maybe one other person, and I was like, dude, this is fucking crazy. Like, I have to watch 28 Days Later now. The first 5 minutes of this movie established that. Not only am I gripped and ready for whatever the fuck 28 Weeks Later is about to be, but I wanted to leave and go get a copy of 28 Days Later. And so that's how effective this opening is. It sold me on 2 movies. So you have so much that is built up in this opening. Not only does it reestablish the intensity of these zombies, but it puts you in this little farmhouse where they're barricaded. They're seemingly safe. Slowly that gets compromised. And so that's just, it's terrifying the way that all happens, and how anxiety driven that sequence is. But then you also have, among all of the zombie action, you have an establishment of this main core plot point in the movie where this husband, in survival mode, leaves his wife and runs away to live, and getting chased by hordes that are not letting up. And all the emotions that happen in that sequence is crazy enough, because you have this guy that loves his wife, obviously, but he's being chased by these ravenous monsters, turns around, gets a couple of seconds to decide, where he sees his wife in the window and she's looking at him like, help me, don't leave me. And he's like, bye, bitch. And just fucking books it. And then you see in the background, like, she gets taken by this horde. Now, the crazy thing is how complicated all that is, because obviously, like, there's a very fucked up nature to that, where you're like, dude, like, how do you leave your wife? Like, how do you do that? How could anybody do that loves their significant other? But at the same time, you have the logic side of it, where it's like, dude, she's fucked. Like, even if he decided to start running back into the house, before he even gets to the front door, she's, getting pummeled by 17 zombies. So I don't know. It creates this very complicated thing where you're like, damn, that really is a good establishment of like a what if scenario. Like, it is not clear cut. It is not an easy decision whatsoever. And so there's so much that's built in that opening, establishing the tone, the new, more studio look of the movie versus the very, dirty, grimy look of 28 Days Later, reestablishing how intense these zombies are, putting it in a new setting of this countryside, introducing you to these two characters. And then you have this kind of impending lie that the father tells that is lingering over him and his children for the first, half of the movie, first act of the movie. And so, yeah, it's such a good opening that, man, makes me want to watch both of these movies again. Just talking about this opening, that's how fucking good it is. And now we are moving on to the absolute titans. And I would imagine that at least 3 of these 4 would be on pretty much everybody's list of best horror openings of all time, probably in their top 5 as well. Coming in at number 4 for me, and is only really number 4 because I think it's one of the weaker movies itself of this entire list, and that is When a Stranger Calls. I've never seen the remake. I'm sure it has the same exact opening. It's just stretched across, but I'm talking about the original. And I have very vivid, imprinted images of watching this movie, like a permanent memory of watching this movie for the first time. And it was my dad. I think he was dating somebody at the time, and when I was a kid, I was very easily sold on especially horror films. Like, I just loved hearing descriptions of scenes. And so whether it was my dad or my uncle or somebody like, yeah, this movie has this thing where this happens, and I'd be like, oh, and then I would just be obsessed until I got to see that movie. I would go to the video store, try to rent it. I would try to beg my dad to fucking buy it. Whatever I had to do, I would obsess over it. And so this was one of those times where we were all just sitting around discussing horror movies, and my dad started to talk about this movie When a Stranger Calls and started to describe the opening. And I was like, just hearing the description like had me on edge. I'm like, I got to see that fucking thing. And so I remember like it was yesterday. It was one of the few times I have memories of being around my mom. And me and her went to the video store, and I was determined to find this movie. It might have even been around Halloween time. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, we got a hold of it, went back to her apartment. It's dark. I'm by myself. She's not even really watching it with me. I'm just by myself sitting on the floor on this old shitty little tube TV watching When a Stranger Calls. And the opening 10 minutes or so of this film is the entire legacy of the movie. The rest of it's not very good. I'll be honest with you. I never thought it was a very good movie, but the opening scene to this film is like absolutely top-notch Titan level, where you have this babysitter and she's in this big open house seemingly by herself. The kids are already upstairs asleep, so she's really just there to just be a presence in the house. There's not actually any sight of these kids. And so this very still, quiet house, and she starts to get these phone calls. She picks up the phone, and then just this voice, have you checked the children? Have you checked the children? And it just starts to be a little annoying at first. And then this call keeps coming in. Have you checked the children? And it starts to unnerve her. She starts to call the police. And it's just back and forth, these different phone calls where she's calling the police. She gets the prank calls or seemingly prank calls that start to seem a little more sinister. They keep showing shots of this house being open. And, especially when you're babysitting in a house you don't know, there's something about a house that you're unfamiliar with that is very creepy, especially at night. When you're in your own house, you know where to run. You know where everything's at. You know where the upstairs is. You know where the exits are. In a house that you're just babysitting for and you've basically just sat on the couch the entire time, you're surrounded by unknowns. And it gets to where it slowly starts to ratchet that up a bit. The cops are trying to trace the call. Says next time he calls, keep him on the phone. So she actually tries to have this conversation with him, and the dude's voice is so sinister. And then she, in like a panic to try to keep him on the phone, she lets him know that she has called the cops. And he, what? And then hangs up the phone, gets a phone call from the cops. The call's coming from upstairs. The call's coming from inside the house.
Jill, this is Sergeant Sacker. Listen to me. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. A squad car's going over there right now. Just get out of that house.
And the way that the camera zooms on her face and the score ratchets up, and like she gets that bit of information, and then it starts to show all of these still shots of these different rooms of the house, and it just puts you on edge, like, where the fuck is he? And then she slowly goes to the front door. And as soon as she gets there, you just see this door open up on the top, and this light comes through, and then this silhouette of a guy steps out, and the panic of trying to open the door, but the chain's on it. Like, everything in that opening sequence is one of the scariest things that I have ever seen. And then, of course, my fucking father, through divine intervention, which most of our stories has to do with that asshole having some kind of a sixth sense with that. Just there's no worldly explanation for how he knew or whatever. But I was watching this movie unbeknownst to him, and it got to the most intense part of that opening scene, and he fucking called my mom's apartment. So I'm sitting there like I'm actually like tense. All of a sudden, the phone goes off, and I'm like, what the fuck? No, I ain't checked the children. And so I'm talking to him on the phone, and I tell him what happened. And he's dying laughing. Had no idea. He was just calling to like check up on me or something like that, but just dying laughing that he just made one of the more scary horror sequences ever, like this real life terrifying thing for me. So I have a very fond memory of watching this opening scene to this movie. Not so much the rest of it, but it's one of the creepiest and simplest openings to a horror film of all time. And it also heavily inspired an opening that we have yet to talk about. Coming in at number 3, we have Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, Jaws. And Jaws, some people don't consider it a horror film. I do. So let's not have that argument in the comment section, please. Jaws is not only one of the greatest movies of all time, one of the most timeless movies of all time, but that opening sequence, like, the movie in and of itself is the reason why people are still afraid to swim in the ocean or even swim in pools. Like, this movie has established a phobia in generations of people. And this opening is a lot of the reason why, because you don't see anything. And that is what people are afraid of, is being in the water and being attacked by something that they can't see coming. And so you have these two people at a party getting drunk, flirting with each other. The chick wants to go and skinny dip. The guy passes out drunk on the beach before he can even get his pants off. One of the few times it's good to have whiskey dick, I guess. And then the guy, or the girl's off just swimming. Well, first of all, why the fuck did you swim so far off, like at night? Like, she's off in buoys and shit. Like, you kind of asked for it, girl. Anyway, she's off in the water, and all you see is everything from here up. You know, something tugs at her, something pulls her around. You never see what it is. It could be anything. Like, we know it's a shark, obviously, but that's the intensity. That is the fear of this opening scene, is the unknown, not seeing any of it. And that's kind of the genius of Jaws, the unintentional genius of it, because they had so many problems with the mechanical shark and didn't show it nearly as much as they initially intended to. That's the genius of why the movie works so much, is because so much of it is the unknown. So much of it is not what you see, just the suggestion of it, or the aftermath of it, or the suggestion of it. And so seeing that girl get drug around and pulled under the water up and down by something that you can't see, especially at night, like it sets you up for an absolute nightmare fuel experience. For a movie that many consider not to be a horror film, it's one of the most horrific sequences in film history. So, yeah, I mean, what else needs to be said about Jaws? But that's one of my absolute favorites, coming in at number 3. Coming in at number 2, something that I think probably most people would have at number 1. And for a minute, I did have it at number 1. And that's going to be the opening to Wes Craven's Scream. This is the opening that is heavily inspired by When a Stranger Calls, but I think evolves into something that is so much better. So there's so much to talk about in this opening scene. I mean, Scream is a great movie. It's a classic, but the opening scene is, for a movie that is great all the way through, it's also kind of the best part of the movie. And the movie struggles to keep up with what this opening scene does. So there's so much about it that people remember it and value it for, whether it's the introduction of what Ghostface looks like, the whole aspect of the game that he is playing, where you call and it starts off as a seemingly kind of flirty call and turns very sinister very quickly, and then turns into this psychotic game where he's asking horror movie trivia and you have to get it right or you die, which is a very cool like meta aspect to it that was so fresh and new for the time. You have Drew Barrymore in here, who is kind of teased as being the lead, or you would assume she is because she's easily the biggest star that starred in this movie at the time, and she's on the poster, and the movie opens with her. You're like, okay, cool, so she's the final girl. Nope, she's the first girl. So that whole side of it, which is something that's inspired from Psycho in a lot of ways, and showing the boyfriend get it disemboweled. I mean, everything about this is the perfect horror sequence that starts off regular shit happening, chick making popcorn at home alone, weird little phone call, and it just slowly and steadily just dials up the tension, and it never dissipates. It never takes a moment to breathe or go back down. It just constantly keeps going up, constantly gets tighter, constantly gets more intense until you see the title card. So very much like When a Stranger Calls, same kind of approach, but much more stylish, much more fun, much more intense, much more new age, of course. And I think it stood the test of time better because Scream, to me, a significantly better movie than When a Stranger Calls. So yeah, you knew it was going to be on this list somewhere. You knew it was going to be very high. It's coming in here at number 2. But coming in at number 1 for me, and again, this is my personal list. I'm sure it's going to frustrate some people because this is another one of those movies that, for some reason, I get people that say this is not a horror film. And whatever. If you don't consider it a horror film, don't put it on your list. Number 1 for me, and I almost forgot to include this. Like, I was thinking of all of these really intense and scary openings. And then suddenly the memory of this opening scene popped into my head, and I was like, oh my God, that's easily number 1. So if you've been following me for any number of time, you can pretty clearly establish that my 2 favorite genres of film by a landslide is horror and action. And my number 1 is a movie that blends both of those genres together, and that is the original Blade. To me, you could just say top 10 opening scenes in movies, period. And this has a strong shot at being my number 1, certainly in my top 3. There is so much that I love about this opening sequence of the first Blade. I mean, we had never really seen anything like Blade at the time. A lot of us didn't realize that it was a comic book film, but this is back in the day when comic book films were just shit, and you barely ever got them. They never got a good one. And so there's so much that it establishes the world. It establishes the tone and the look of this first movie. To blend action and horror together, it totally goes for broke in both of those aspects, where you have this guy that is brought into this nightclub, and suddenly blood starts to spit out of the top, and you got that music going the entire time. Like, I'm not a techno guy, but that fucking song goes hard and just kind of get you like and gets you into the sequence, and then suddenly the blood starts to spray down. And then one by one, this guy is looking around, and everybody, the hundreds of people that he is surrounded by, suddenly start to turn monstrous, and their fangs start to come out, and they're like growling at him and shit. And it's genuinely fucking scary. There's not many vampire movies that I would call scary, but there are certainly sequences within them that I think are scary when you have these monsters, like you have these beasts that are going to just tear you limb from limb and eat you alive. And the way that they shoot them with the sound design and the look and the blood rain and everything, like, it is genuinely scary when you start to see this one innocent human guy surrounded by monsters that are all about to feast on him, and seemingly hopeless, running away, getting hit, and you're trying to slip through this floor that's covered in blood. And then suddenly he reaches these black boots that are completely clean. Of course they are. And then the crowd just starts to split, and you see Wesley Snipes in full Blade getup for the first time. The baddest motherfucker in movie history, in my opinion. And just everything in that, of like going from intense horror to all of a sudden like, oh, you guys are fucked. Like, that is just such an awesome emotional transition that you have as a viewer. And then the way that you hear whisper, it's him, it's the Daywalker. And the effortless coolness that Wesley Snipes has as this character, as he just looks up at everybody, and as they all know, like, we're fucked. And he's like, yeah, yeah, you motherfucker's about to get it. And then it just goes into a very, very kick-ass action sequence that still holds up quite a bit. I mean, action cinema has grown and has evolved a lot since Blade, but it's still a very good, very effective and fun action sequence that a lot of it is martial arts and hand-to-hand combat and actual stunt work, actual martial arts done by Wesley Snipes as he just kicks the shit out of this entire room of vampires, and he's exploding them with stakes and swords and punching them and breaking their necks onto the floor and everything. I mean, it does every possible thing that you would want the best version of an introduction to Blade to be. And because those are my two favorite genres of films, that's kind of why it transcends a little bit to be my number one over these other ones, because it's not just a scary opening sequence. It's not just a sequence that establishes the world and the tone and the type of ride you're about to go on. It doesn't just establish the main character and how much of a badass that he is, but it establishes the type of action that you're about to see. And so there's just so much in that opening 5 to 6 minutes of Blade that for as much as I love the whole movie, for as much as I love Blade 2, as a movie, I actually prefer Blade 2. That isolated sequence is the best Blade anything that we have ever gotten and probably ever will get. Like I am cautiously optimistic about whatever this new Blade is going to be, if we ever actually get it. But I don't care if you get Christopher Nolan and you get like the greatest directors and writers and actors all teaming up to make Blade. I don't think you can top that opening scene for Blade. Like, to me, that is just like peak. That is like peak cinema for my own taste. So for me, my number one favorite opening scene to a horror film of all time is the original Blade. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a recent top 10 I did of the top 10 saddest moments in horror. If you want to check that out, be sure to check out Factor Meals in the video description below, and like, share, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.